You have built a life, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, believing that family meant safety, that the people who brought you into this world would never be the ones to take everything away. And then one morning, without warning, without explanation, strangers appear at your door with papers that say you no longer have a home, and the signatures at the bottom belong to the two people you trusted most in this world. If you have ever felt the ground disappear beneath your feet, if you have ever been blindsided by the very people who were supposed to protect you, then what I am about to share with you will shake you to your core. This is a story about betrayal that defies belief, about a daughter who discovered that her own parents had been planning her destruction while smiling at her across the dinner table. And what she did next, how she rose from the ashes of that devastation, will change everything you thought you knew about survival, about justice, and about the fierce power that lives inside every person who has ever been underestimated. I am Patricia. I am 67 years old, and I still remember the exact color of the sky on the morning my life collapsed. It was that pale gray blue that comes just before sunrise, that quiet hour when the world holds its breath and anything seems possible. I had been awake for 20 minutes already, lying in my bed in the house I had called home for 43 years, listening to the familiar sounds of early morning, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, a car starting somewhere down the street, the soft creak of the old oak tree in the backyard as a breeze moved through its branches. I was thinking about the garden, about how the tomatoes would need staking soon, about the small pleasures that had become the rhythm of my retirement after 38 years of teaching elementary school. I had given everything to that career, watched thousands of children pass through my classroom, celebrated their triumphs and worried over their struggles, and now in these golden years I had earned the right to slow down, to tend my vegetables, and read my books, and enjoy the peace I had worked so hard to create. My husband Frank had passed 7 years earlier, taken by a heart attack that came without warning on a Tuesday afternoon while he was watching a baseball game, and though the grief had nearly broken me, I had rebuilt. I had filled the empty spaces with purpose, with community, with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. My 2 children, my son Daniel and my daughter Rebecca, had been my anchors through those difficult years, or so I believed. Daniel was 52, a financial advisor in Phoenix with a wife and 3 teenage children. Rebecca was 48, divorced, living just 20 minutes away in the same suburb where she had grown up. We saw each other often, had dinner together at least twice a month, talked on the phone every few days. I thought I knew them. I thought I understood the shape of my family, the bonds that held us together. I was wrong about everything. The knock came at 6:14 in the morning, loud and official, the kind of knock that announces itself as authority before you even reach the door. I pulled on my robe, the soft blue one Frank had given me for our 40th anniversary, and walked through the house I knew by heart even in darkness, the hallway with its family photographs spanning decades, the living room where I had hosted birthday parties and holiday dinners and quiet evenings of conversation, the entryway with the brass coat hooks Frank had installed the year we moved in, back when Daniel was still in diapers, and Rebecca was just a dream we had not yet dreamed. I opened the door to find 2 police officers and a man in a gray suit holding a clipboard. The officers looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot, not meeting my eyes. The man in the suit looked like he had done this 100 times before and had learned to make his face into something neutral, something that could not be touched by the destruction he carried in his briefcase. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, and his voice was polite but empty, a voice that had learned to deliver devastation without inflection. "Are you Patricia Ellen Morrison?" I told him I was. He handed me an envelope, thick and official, and began explaining in words that seemed to float past me like leaves in a current. Eviction, property transfer, signatures verified, 30 days to vacate. I heard myself asking questions, heard my voice rising with confusion and disbelief, but the words that came back made no sense. According to the documents in my trembling hands, I had signed over ownership of my house to my children 6 months ago. According to those same documents, I had agreed to a rental arrangement that I had subsequently violated. According to the precise black letters on white paper, I had no legal claim to the only home I had known for 4 decades, the home where I had raised my babies and buried my heart and built every dream I ever dared to dream. I do not remember the officers leaving. I do not remember closing the door. I remember finding myself somehow on the couch in the living room, still clutching that envelope, staring at the wall where my wedding photograph hung in its silver frame. Frank smiled at me from 47 years ago, young and confident in his rented tuxedo, and I smiled back at him, barely recognizable as the woman I had become, so full of hope and certainty about the life that stretched before us. How do you explain to a photograph that everything you built together has been stolen? How do you tell your dead husband that the children you raised, the children you poured your soul into, have become strangers capable of cruelty you cannot comprehend? I sat there as the sun rose and filled the room with golden light, sat there as the morning sounds of the neighborhood filtered through the windows, sat there until the phone rang and shattered the silence. It was Rebecca. "Mom," she said, and her voice was bright and casual, the voice of a daughter calling to chat about nothing in particular. "I wanted to see if you needed anything from the store. I'm going to Costco later and thought I would check." I listened to her speak, this woman I had nursed through fevers and comforted through heartbreaks and loved with every fiber of my being, and I tried to find the monster in her voice. I tried to hear the betrayal, the calculation, the cold machinery of deception that must have been running beneath the surface all along. But she sounded like my Rebecca, my baby girl, my bright-eyed child who used to climb into my lap and tell me I was the best mommy in the whole world. "Mom, are you there?" I hung up without answering. I could not speak to her. I could not trust my voice, could not trust the words that might come out, could not trust anything anymore. The next hours passed in a blur of phone calls and disbelief. I called my lawyer, an old friend named Harold Chen, who had handled Frank's estate and various small matters over the years. He told me to bring the documents immediately, that he would clear his morning schedule. I drove to his office on autopilot, navigating streets I had driven 1,000 times. But everything looked different now, distorted, as if I were seeing the world through warped glass. The neat houses with their manicured lawns, the shopping center where I bought my groceries, the elementary school where I had spent nearly 4 decades shaping young minds. All of it seemed alien, hostile, part of a reality I no longer understood. Harold's face, when he read the documents, told me everything I needed to know before he spoke a single word. His expression moved through confusion to concern to something darker, something that looked like controlled outrage. "Patricia," he said, leaning back in his chair and pressing his fingertips together, "these signatures look authentic. Either you signed these papers and do not remember, or someone has committed a very serious crime." I told him I had never seen those documents before in my life. I told him I would never, under any circumstances, sign away my home to anyone, not even my children. I told him that something was terribly wrong, that someone had forged my signature, that this was all a nightmare that could not possibly be real. He nodded slowly, making notes on a yellow legal pad. He asked me questions about my relationship with Daniel and Rebecca, about any tensions or conflicts, about money and inheritance and family dynamics. I answered as honestly as I could, searching my memory for warning signs I might have missed, for cracks in the foundation I had been too blind to see. And slowly, painfully, pieces began to emerge. 6 months ago, Daniel had visited from Phoenix, staying with me for a long weekend. He had been attentive and charming, bringing me flowers and taking me to dinner, spending hours going through old photo albums and reminiscing about his childhood. He had asked me to sign some papers related to his business, something about adding me as a reference for a loan application, and I had trusted him completely. I had signed where he pointed without reading carefully, without asking questions, because he was my son, and I loved him, and it never occurred to me that he could be anything other than what he appeared. Harold's face grew grimmer as I spoke. He asked if Rebecca had been present during that visit. I told him she had stopped by several times, that the three of us had dinner together at my house one evening, that she had been warm and affectionate as always. "Do you remember signing anything in front of a notary?" Harold asked. I closed my eyes and searched my memory. There had been a woman, a friend of Daniel's, he said, someone he had brought by to meet me. She had seemed pleasant and professional, had chatted with me about gardening while Daniel organized some papers on the dining room table. I remembered signing things, multiple pages, assuming they were all related to the loan reference Daniel had mentioned. I remembered the woman pressing her official stamp to the papers, explaining that notarization was required for certain financial documents. I remembered feeling proud that my son trusted me enough to help with his business affairs. I remembered nothing else because there had been nothing else to see, only the smooth operation of a trap that had been set and sprung before I even knew I was prey. The days that followed were the most painful of my life, more painful even than losing Frank, because at least his death had been honest. At least the grief of widowhood had not been laced with betrayal. I tried to call Daniel, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I drove to Rebecca's apartment, but she would not answer the door even though I could see her car in the parking lot. I sat in my car and watched her windows, waiting for some sign of the daughter I thought I knew. But the blinds stayed closed and the door stayed shut, and eventually I drove home to a house that was no longer mine. Harold worked quickly, filing motions and gathering evidence, but he warned me that these cases were complicated. The signatures matched samples from my bank and other documents. The notarization appeared legitimate. Daniel and Rebecca had covered their tracks with the precision of people who had been planning this for a long time. Proving forgery or fraud would require handwriting experts and forensic analysis, would require demonstrating that I had not understood what I was signing, would require unraveling a web of deception that my own children had spent months constructing. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking. 30 days to vacate the only home I had ever known. I could not sleep. I wandered through the rooms at night, touching walls and door frames and light switches as if I could absorb the house into my body, as if I could carry it with me wherever I was forced to go. I stood in Daniel's old bedroom, unchanged since he had left for college 30 years ago, and tried to understand how the boy who had made me Mother's Day cards with crayon hearts could become a man who would steal his mother's home. I sat on the floor of Rebecca's room, surrounded by the dolls and books I had saved from her childhood, and searched for some explanation that did not require me to accept that my daughter was capable of such cruelty. I found nothing. There was no answer that made sense, no story I could tell myself that would make the pain bearable. There was only the raw fact of what they had done, the inescapable reality that the people I loved most in the world had looked at me and seen not a mother but an obstacle, not a person but a property to be acquired. If this story is resonating with you, if you have felt the confusion and pain of family betrayal, you are not alone in carrying this weight. This channel exists because stories like these need to be told, because the people who have lived through similar devastation need to know that their experiences are real and valid and shared by others. Subscribe so we can continue this journey together, building a community where your pain is understood and your voice matters. On the 12th day after the eviction notice, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was from a woman named Margaret Chen, no relation to my lawyer Harold, who introduced herself as a private investigator specializing in elder financial abuse. She told me that Harold had hired her to look into my case, that she had been doing some preliminary research, and that she had discovered information I needed to hear immediately. "Can we meet?" she asked. "There are things that should not be said over the phone." We met at a coffee shop near my house, a place I had visited hundreds of times over the years, but which now felt like foreign territory. Margaret was in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and gray-streaked hair and the manner of someone who had seen too much of the world's ugliness to be surprised by anything. She ordered black coffee and got straight to the point. "Your children have been planning this for at least 2 years," she said, spreading photographs and documents across the table between us. They hired a company that specializes in, let us call it, estate restructuring, though the more accurate term would be theft. This company creates fraudulent documents, provides fake notaries, and helps adult children gain control of their parents' assets before those parents die. It is a growing industry, if you can stomach thinking of it that way. More than 20,000 cases reported last year, and those are just the ones that get reported. I stared at the photographs she had laid before me. Daniel meeting with a man in an expensive suit outside a restaurant in Phoenix. Rebecca handing an envelope to a woman I recognized as the fake notary. Documents with my forged signature, dozens of them, transferring not just my house, but also bank accounts and investment portfolios I had not even thought to check. The scope of their theft was staggering, far beyond the home that had first alerted me to their betrayal. They had taken everything, systematically and methodically, over the course of years while smiling at me across dinner tables and telling me they loved me. "But here is the part you need to understand," Margaret continued, leaning forward and fixing me with those sharp eyes. "This company your children hired has done this before, many times, and 3 months ago one of their victims died under suspicious circumstances. A 74-year-old woman in Scottsdale whose children had used the same service to take control of her assets. She fell down a staircase in her home, the home she was being evicted from, a week before she was supposed to vacate. The police ruled it an accident, but her sister has been pushing for a reinvestigation. And your children, Patricia, your son Daniel in particular, has been in contact with the same people who were involved in that case." I felt the coffee turn to acid in my stomach. I felt the room tilt and spin around me. I thought about Daniel's smile, about the way he had hugged me goodbye after that visit 6 months ago, about the words he had whispered in my ear. "I love you, Mom." You know that, right? I always want what is best for you. Had he been planning my death even then? Had he held me in his arms and calculated how much easier everything would be if I simply were not around to contest his theft? I want you to understand what you are dealing with, Margaret said gently. This is not just about money or property. These people, this company, they have a pattern. Once they have taken everything they can take through fraud, they eliminate the victim to prevent any chance of recovery or prosecution. I am not trying to frighten you, but I need you to know the danger you are in. Your children may not be willing to wait for you to leave quietly. They may have already made arrangements for something more permanent. I drove home from that meeting in a state of shock so profound that I barely registered the streets passing by. My children wanted me dead. My babies, the human beings I had created and nurtured and sacrificed for, had become monsters willing to end my life for an inheritance they could not wait to receive. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house that no longer belonged to me, trying to process a reality that defied all my understanding of human nature. How does a mother accept that her children have become her enemies? How does a woman who spent her life teaching children about kindness and integrity reconcile herself to the fact that her own offspring learned none of those lessons? I did not have answers. I only had the cold truth that Margaret had laid before me, the photographs and documents and connections that painted a picture of calculated evil. And somewhere in the depths of my shock, something else began to stir, something ancient and fierce, something that had been sleeping inside me for 67 years, waiting for a moment exactly like this one. I was not going to die. I was not going to surrender my home, my assets, my dignity to people who had shown they deserved none of it. I was going to fight and I was going to win. And when I was finished, Daniel and Rebecca would understand that they had made the worst mistake of their miserable lives when they decided their mother was an easy target. Right now, you might be feeling exactly what I felt in that moment. That sickening realization that the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally have made you feel disposable, have seen you as nothing more than an obstacle to their greed. I need to pause here and ask you something directly, something that matters. Have you ever been made to feel like you do not matter to your own family, like your value is measured only in what you can give them, and once that giving is done, so are you? If you are nodding right now, if there are tears forming because someone finally put it into words, I want you to know that your experience is valid. When you share your story in the comments, even just a few words, you are helping someone else who is reading this realize they were never alone in their pain. You are building the community that none of us had, but all of us needed. So let me see you down there. Type in the comments. I have felt like a burden to my own family. That is all. Just that sentence. And I promise you, when you read the other comments, when you see how many people have written those same words, you will understand that you were never alone in this. You were just silent together. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. Your voice matters here. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I had not felt in weeks. I made coffee in the kitchen that would soon belong to someone else, sat at the table where my children had eaten thousands of meals, and began to plan. Harold had warned me that the legal process would be slow and uncertain, that proving fraud against my own children would require evidence that might not exist or might not be convincing to a judge. Margaret had given me information that was terrifying but also valuable, connections and patterns that could be used to build a larger case. But I knew something that neither my lawyer nor my investigator fully understood. I knew my children. I knew their weaknesses, their fears, the secret shames they thought they had hidden from the world. And I knew that the most powerful weapon in any battle is knowledge that your enemy does not realize you possess. I started with Rebecca because she had always been the weaker of the two. Even as a child, she had been easily influenced, eager to please whoever held power over her at any given moment. Daniel was the mastermind, I had no doubt, but Rebecca was the one who would crack under pressure. I drove to her apartment and parked where she could see me from her window. Then I waited. For 3 hours I sat there, watching her blinds twitch every few minutes as she looked out at me, knowing she was inside, feeling the walls close in. Finally, she emerged, walking toward my car with the defensive posture of a guilty person preparing their excuses. "Mom," she said, standing beside my window without meeting my eyes, "you cannot just sit out here like this. The neighbors are going to call someone." "Let them call," I said calmly. "I am a mother waiting to speak with her daughter. There is nothing illegal about that." She shifted her weight, crossed her arms, tried to find some position that would make her feel less exposed. "What do you want?" "I want to understand," I said. "I want to look in your eyes and hear you explain how you could do this to me. I want to know what I did wrong, what failure of motherhood created a daughter capable of stealing from her own mother and conspiring to." And here I paused, watching her face closely, do even worse. The color drained from her cheeks. Her arms tightened across her chest. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, but her voice wavered and her eyes finally met mine, and in them I saw terror. She knew exactly what I was implying, which meant Margaret's information was correct. They had discussed it, planned it, made arrangements for my permanent removal from the situation. "I want you to listen very carefully, Rebecca." I leaned closer to the window, keeping my voice low and steady. "I know everything. I know about the company Daniel hired. I know about the fake notary. I know about the woman in Scottsdale who fell down the stairs a week before her eviction. And I know that you and your brother have been having conversations about how much simpler everything would be if I had an accident of my own." She opened her mouth to deny it, to protest, to spin some desperate lie. But I held up my hand and she stopped. "I am not wearing a wire. I am not recording this conversation. This is just between a mother and the daughter who betrayed her. And I want you to know that if anything happens to me, anything at all, the information I have compiled will be sent to the FBI, to the State Attorney General, to every news outlet in the country, and to the families of every other victim your company has destroyed. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, Rebecca. You and Daniel both. Is that what you want?" Tears were streaming down her face now, her whole body trembling like a child caught in a lie too enormous to escape. "Mom," she whispered, "it was not supposed to be like this. Daniel said you would never find out. He said it was just about the money, just about getting our inheritance early while you were still healthy and we needed it. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I never wanted." She broke off, sobbing, unable to finish the sentence. "But you knew," I said quietly. "You knew what he was planning and you did nothing to stop it. You let me sign those papers. You watched me trust you and Daniel completely while you were plotting to destroy me. How do you live with yourself, Rebecca? How do you sleep at night knowing what you have become?" She collapsed against my car, sliding down until she was crouching on the pavement, weeping into her hands. I watched her cry and waited for some feeling of satisfaction, some sense of justice being served, but all I felt was emptiness. This woman sobbing on the ground was my daughter. I had held her when she was born, had nursed her through every childhood illness, had cheered at her graduations and comforted her through her divorce. She was flesh of my flesh, heart of my heart, and she had been willing to let her brother arrange my death for money. The confrontation with Rebecca was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, I became someone I had never been before, a warrior in a battle I had never chosen but refused to lose. Margaret and Harold worked together to document everything, creating a case file that grew thicker by the day. I hired a forensic accountant who discovered that Daniel had been embezzling from his own clients for years, using my stolen assets to cover the shortfalls before they could be detected. I found the families of other victims, 8 in total, who had lost parents or grandparents to the same company Daniel had used. Together we formed an unlikely alliance, sharing information and resources, building a case that went far beyond my individual situation. The 30-day eviction deadline came and went while the legal battles raged. I remained in my home, protected by emergency injunctions and the growing attention from law enforcement. Daniel stopped answering his phone entirely. Rebecca, broken and guilt-ridden, had begun cooperating with investigators in exchange for potential leniency. She told them everything, names and dates and account numbers, a flood of information that implicated not only her brother, but the entire network of predators who had made elder abuse their business model. Stories like these have the power to change how we see our own lives. If you are finding clarity here, if something in this narrative is helping you understand your own situation better, consider subscribing. Every story I share is chosen to help us all grow stronger, wiser, and more compassionate with ourselves and others. You deserve that growth, and you do not have to make this journey alone. 3 months after that morning when the police knocked on my door, Daniel was arrested at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport as he attempted to board a flight to a country with no extradition treaty. The charges included elder abuse, financial fraud, conspiracy, and when the Scottsdale case was reopened and new evidence emerged, accessory to murder. The woman who had fallen down the stairs had not fallen at all. She had been pushed by someone who had been paid to make her death look accidental, and Daniel's financial records showed payments to that same individual just weeks before my eviction notice arrived. He had been planning my death with the same methodical precision he had used to steal my money. He had budgeted for my murder the way other people budget for home repairs. I sat in the courtroom on the day Daniel was arraigned, watching him enter in handcuffs wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of the expensive suits he had always favored. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow, as if the removal of his power had physically shrunk him. When he saw me sitting in the gallery, his face contorted with an emotion I could not quite read. Anger, perhaps, or shame, or the frustrated rage of a predator who has finally been caught. "Mom," he called out as the guards led him toward the defense table. "Mom, you have to understand, I did it for you. I was trying to protect the family wealth. I was trying to make sure we would all be taken care of." The lies came so easily to him, even now, even facing charges that could put him in prison for the rest of his life. He had practiced deception for so long that he no longer knew how to do anything else. I said nothing. I simply looked at him, this stranger, who had once been my son, and let him see in my eyes exactly how much his words meant to me. which was nothing at all. Rebecca received a reduced sentence in exchange for her testimony, 5 years in a minimum security facility with the possibility of parole after 3. I visit her sometimes, not out of forgiveness, but out of some obligation I cannot quite name. She cries every time she sees me, apologizes endlessly, swears she was manipulated by Daniel, and did not understand what she was agreeing to. Perhaps that is partially true. Perhaps she was more puppet than partner in the scheme that nearly destroyed me. But she was also an adult who made choices, who saw what was happening and chose to participate rather than warn me. I cannot forget that, no matter how much she cries. I do not know if I will ever forgive her. I am not sure forgiveness is even the right goal. Some betrayals are too profound for simple absolution. Some wounds heal, but leave scars that ache with every change in weather. I know how isolating it feels when you are going through something difficult and nobody seems to understand. That is why I created this space. Here, your feelings are valid, your struggles are real, and your story matters. If this channel is giving you even a small sense of relief or understanding, please subscribe. You deserve to have a place where you feel heard and seen. The legal proceedings took nearly 2 years to fully resolve. Daniel was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. The woman in Scottsdale was legally recognized as a murder victim, and her sister finally received the closure she had been seeking for so long. The company that had facilitated all of this, the estate restructuring service that had destroyed so many families, was dismantled completely. Its owners were prosecuted, its assets seized, its records turned over to authorities who used them to identify and help other victims. I got my house back, along with everything else that had been stolen from me. But the truth is that a house is just walls and a roof, wood and brick and glass. What I lost cannot be measured in property or dollars. I lost my children. I lost my faith in the fundamental goodness of family bonds. I lost the peaceful retirement I had earned through decades of hard work and sacrifice. I lost the ability to trust without reservation, to love without suspicion, to believe that the people closest to me would never deliberately cause me harm. In the years since all of this happened, I have rebuilt my life in ways I never anticipated. I became an advocate for elder rights, speaking at conferences and lobbying for stronger laws against financial abuse. I founded a support group for parents who have been betrayed by their adult children, a gathering of wounded hearts who find comfort in shared experience. I wrote my story for newspapers and magazines, appeared on television programs, became a voice for the thousands of vulnerable elderly people who fall victim to similar schemes every year, and slowly, painfully, I found purpose in the wreckage of my family. I am Patricia. I am 67 years old, and I am still standing. My children tried to take everything from me, including my life, and they failed. Not because I was smarter or stronger than they expected, but because I refused to accept the role of victim they had assigned me. I refused to disappear quietly, to die conveniently, to become another statistic in their ledger of successful thefts. I fought with everything I had because I knew my own worth, even when the people who should have valued me most decided I was worthless. And that is the lesson I want you to take from my story. Your value does not depend on how others treat you. Your dignity does not require their respect. When the people who should love you choose instead to destroy you, the only thing you can control is your response. You can collapse into despair, or you can rise up and fight. You can accept the story they have written about you, or you can write your own story with your own hand. If this story is stirring something inside you, if you are recognizing patterns in your own life or finding the courage to make changes, that is exactly why these stories need to be told. Subscribe to this channel and join a community of people who are choosing their own dignity, setting boundaries, and refusing to be diminished. We are rewriting the script together. Every subscription is a vote for the idea that our experiences matter, that our voices deserve to be heard, that we are more than what has been done to us. The oak tree in my backyard is still standing, older now but still strong. I sit beneath it sometimes on summer evenings, watching the sun set over the neighborhood I have called home for more than 4 decades. I think about Frank, who would have been horrified by what his children became, who would have moved heaven and earth to protect me if he had been alive to see it. I think about Daniel and Rebecca as children, before whatever darkness took root in their hearts, when they still looked at me with love and called me the best mommy in the whole world. I grieve for those children even as I accept that they grew into adults I do not recognize. I have not erased them from my life entirely. The photographs still hang on my walls, though I have removed the more recent ones. The memories still live in my mind, the good ones alongside the terrible ones. I cannot pretend that 40 years of motherhood did not happen, cannot act as if the love I felt was some kind of illusion. The love was real. Their betrayal does not change that, but it does mean that love by itself is not enough. Love must be accompanied by boundaries, by awareness, by a willingness to protect yourself even from the people you cherish most. Sometimes we need to hear that transformation is possible, that we are not doomed to repeat the same painful patterns forever. If these stories are giving you hope, showing you that change is real and within reach, then stay with me. Subscribe so you never miss a story that might be exactly what you need to hear at exactly the right moment. We are stronger together than we are alone, and your presence here matters more than you know. Today, I am 70 years old. 3 years have passed since that dawn when strangers came to my door and my world collapsed. I have changed in ways I never expected, become harder in some places and softer in others. I have learned that survival is a choice you make every morning when you get out of bed, that resilience is not a trait you are born with, but a muscle you build through exercise. I have learned that some wounds never fully heal, but you can learn to live with the ache. I have learned that family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes family is the community you build when your blood relatives have proven they cannot be trusted. My support group meets every Tuesday evening in the community center down the street from my house. Last week we welcomed a new member, a 72-year-old grandmother named Dorothy, whose son has been pressuring her to sign papers she does not understand. She was trembling when she walked in, just like I trembled in Harold Chen's office on that terrible morning 3 years ago. I held her hand and told her she was in the right place. I told her we understood. I told her she was not alone, that she would never be alone again as long as she stayed connected to this community of survivors. And I watched the fear in her eyes begin to transform into something else, something that looked like hope. That is what I live for now. Those moments when a broken heart realizes it can still beat. Those instances when a person who believed they were worthless discovers they are anything but. Every story of survival reminds us that we are capable of more than we imagine, that we can endure what seems unendurable and emerge on the other side changed but whole. I want to leave you with one final thought. When I was 22 years old, just starting my career as a teacher, An older colleague gave me advice that I have carried with me ever since. She told me that the most important lesson any teacher can share is not about reading or mathematics or history. The most important lesson is this: you are the author of your own story. Other people will try to write chapters for you, will try to decide your ending before you have lived your beginning, will try to reduce you to a character in their narrative rather than the hero of your own. But the pen is in your hand. It has always been in your hand. And no one, no matter how much they have hurt you or how much power they seem to hold, can take that pen away unless you surrender it willingly. I almost surrendered my pen on that morning when the eviction notice arrived. I almost believed the story my children had written for me, the story of a foolish old woman who signed away her home without realizing it and now had to accept the consequences. But I chose a different ending. I chose to fight. I chose to believe that my story was not finished, that the final chapters had not yet been written, that Patricia Ellen Morrison had more living to do and more battles to win. And here I am, 3 years later, telling you about it, still fighting, still winning, still holding the pen. I am Patricia. I survived. And if you are facing your own battle, your own betrayal, your own moment of darkness that seems like it will never end, I want you to know that you can survive too. Not because it is easy, because it is not. Not because the pain will disappear, because it will not. But because you are stronger than you know, more resilient than you believe, more capable of transformation than anyone who has hurt you could ever imagine. Take back your pen, write your own ending, and know that somewhere out there, a 70-year-old grandmother who has been through the fire is cheering you on with every beat of her mended heart. This is my story. Thank you for listening. And if any part of it has touched you, if any word has reached into the place where your pain lives and offered even a moment of comfort, then everything I have endured was worth it. We find meaning in connection. We find healing in community. We find strength in knowing we are not alone. Stay with this channel, stay with this community, and together we will keep telling the stories that need to be told for as long as there are hearts that need to hear them.